Brought to you by Charity Mobile. Support life with every call and text when you switch your cell phone service. Use promo code TRADITION at CharityMobile.com for a special Christmas offer now through February 2nd.
Sometimes the bishops and other people really will say a lot without saying much, or what they choose to talk about all the time is a good inclination of what they truly believe. And when the bishops talk frequently about that sin and way of living that James Martin has an unhealthy interest in for a priest, you begin to wonder. And sometimes they don't make it subtle. We'll go right into this story. Info Vaticana, a traditionally minded conservative, something like that, news site out of Spain, gives us the headline. Italy, Bishop Savino, vice president of the Italian Episcopal Conference, openly defends James Martin type relationships. Openly. Now, 10 years ago, you probably wouldn't have seen that. Now, they don't even hide it. They feel emboldened by Amoris Laetitia. They feel emboldened by Fiducia Supplicans. They feel emboldened by a culture in the West that is decadent and embraces all of these things. And they get very little pushback except from a few podcasters and bloggers and writers. But beyond that, they feel emboldened because we have the data to back this up. Most of the Catholics who go to Mass on a regular basis agree with them. They think the church got it wrong somehow and that we need to get with the times. And that somehow the Holy Spirit was asleep at the wheel when it came to this particular part of Catholic moral teaching. So this bishop, Bishop Savino, again, he's the vice president of the Italian Bishops' Conference. This is a big deal for him to say this. But this comes hot on the heels of the Italian bishops also rejecting the Catholic faith when it comes to morality. Virtually all of them have rejected it. Here are the details. Bishop Francesco Savino, head of the Diocese of Cassano al Ionio and current vice president of the Italian Episcopal Conference, declared in an interview that he considers it wrong to deny James Martin types the possibility of experiencing love on a level of the flesh, so to speak, as well. His words, published by the Italian news outlet Diritto di Cronaca.it and reported by the Catholic Herald, have sparked widespread controversy among the faithful. People in these kinds of relationships should not be deprived of the opportunity to be loved and to love, even on an intimate level of the flesh, because denying them that right, I repeat, is simply wrong, the 70-year-old prelate stated. Savino added that the church must, quote, restore dignity to everyone, especially those who have had it denied. Let's pause here. First, he calls this a right. You have a right to be loved on levels of the flesh, meaning to have a good time. You have that right. Now, the bishop might want to reconnect himself to sacred scripture. Sacred scripture makes no such claims. In fact, in general, it says quite the opposite, that you have no right to engage in the kinds of sins he's got a weird interest in for a bishop. But also, he says the church must restore dignity to everyone, especially those who have had it denied. Now remember, he's talking about living a life as a Catholic, having access to the sacraments. In other words, the church has denied dignity to this group of people, and that we must restore it. The church is guilty of a grave injustice. Stripping people of their dignity is an injustice. The spotless bride of Christ, says this bishop, is not so spotless after all. Vice president of the Italian Bishops' Conference. They make the American bishops look positively traditionalist by comparison. By the way, yesterday, the bishops in the United States elected the Archbishop of Oklahoma City and another conservative bishop to be the heads of the Bishops' Conference. Most are celebrating it, but the new president of the Bishops' Conference, the Archbishop of Oklahoma City, has a track record of not being a fan of the work of Michael Hitchborn and the Lepanto Institute, to put it mildly. So Pray for him. He could use your prayers, especially in this time where he will be taking on a new leadership role for the church. But on the upside, the progressives in the church are very mad about this, so that's a good thing. But back to this bishop. Monsignor Savino is known for his close ties to the James Martin community. On September 6th, he celebrated a mass for them at the Church of Gesù in Rome. Yes, this is the bishop who offered the sacrilegious, blasphemous mass at the Church of the Gesù in Rome that caused everybody to lose their minds and needing that parish to be reconsecrated. This is the bishop. The bishop that when he offered the mass at the homily said Pope Leo XIV told him to do it. He did this as part of the activities for the Jubilee of Hope 2025. The celebration, organized by the lay association Tenda di Giornata, brought together more than 1,000 people from various countries. Among the celebrants were some 30 priests, including the American Jesuit James Martin. That's, again, early September. Known for his activism in the favor of normalization of that sin within the church. And it goes on. It's funny. The article here says Pope Francis reportedly encouraged him to participate in the Jubilee Mass, but that wasn't Pope Francis. That was Pope Leo. I know it's easy to get the two confused, especially these days. But in general, he has actually been pushing for the normalization of that sin in not just the church in Italy, but by doing so at that Jubilee Mass, at the church more broadly. Now, from a place in the church we talk about a lot, but almost never have good news, we got pushback not against this bishop in general, but against the same kinds of things going on in Germany. So LifeSite gives us this headline. German Bishop Oster denounces pro-James Martin Catholic school guidelines as Gnosticism. And Bishop Oster is, by German standards, very conservative. By the rest of the church's standards, not so much. But he's good on this issue, and at least relatively good. And he will probably get canceled for this. Either formally or his own brother bishops will turn their back on him. Because in Germany, the bishops of the church are overwhelmingly co-partisans of or fellow travelers with James Martin. German Bishop Stefan Oster has criticized those guidelines for Catholic schools published by the German Bishops' Conference. In a statement published on his personal website, Oster distanced himself from the DBK, that's the German Bishops' Conference, heterodox document on the diversity of inclinations in Catholic schools. Even though the cover of the brochure says the German bishops, the text does not speak on my behalf. The Bishop of Passau wrote, distancing himself from its content and its theological, philosophical, pedagogical, and developmental psychological substance. For Oster, the document is part of a fundamental struggle over Christian anthropology. The concept of humankind and the church as sacraments is up for debate in this discussion, he stated. He believes that, quote, in its current form, the text produced by the Commission for Religious Education is well on the way to a desacralized understanding of humankind. He stressed that the Catholic understanding of humanity must not be abandoned, but warned that the document may be doing just that. For a different doctrine of humanity leads to a different doctrine of revelation, of the sacraments, of salvation, and thus necessarily to a different doctrine of the church and its existence, and ultimately even to a different understanding of the triune God, end quote. He just said everything that I've been saying about the new synodal church and what they've done at Vatican II with the change in ecclesiology. He just said it in a much better way because he's a bishop. Let's hear him say that again. For a different doctrine of humanity leads to a different doctrine of revelation, of the sacraments, of salvation, and thus necessarily to a different doctrine of the church and its existence, and ultimately even to a different understanding of the triune God, he warned. In other words, it leads to a different religion. German bishops saying this. Pray for Bishop Oster that he can stay the course and adopt that level of orthodox thinking to all aspects of his ministry as a bishop wherever it's needed, and that he is also able to withstand the storm that's almost certainly coming his way. Now, like I said, the U.S. bishops met, and, well, the U.S. bishops met recently, have been going on, and they still have a meeting going on. And this is also at the same time that there's a big meeting on the environment happening in South America. And the Vatican has been sending its representatives to both of these events. We'll start here with Bishop Christophe Pierre, the papal nuncio. He had something pretty wild to say, and it should show you everything you need to know about where they're going. This was shared on X by Matt Gaspers. This is just the video from the event.
I'm convinced that Vatican II remains the key to understanding what kind of church we are called to be today, and the reference point for discerning where we are headed. Pope Leo also is convinced of this. 2 days after his election, he told the cardinals, I quote, "I would like us to renew together today our complete commitment to the path that the Universal Church has now followed for decades in the wake of the Second Vatican Council." He then said that Pope Francis masterfully and concretely set forth this path in Evangelii Gaudium. Having received so much from the Council visions, the question now becomes, what does that ask of us as bishops? How are we to represent the Church the Council describes? It touches every aspect of our ministry. In our priesthood and episcopal vocation, we are called to be men of communion, pastors who walk with the people of God rather than standing apart. In evangelization and ecumenism, we must avoid both ideological narrowing and vague generality, proclaiming the whole gospel with clarity and love. In our engagement with public life, we are not chaplains to parties or distant commentators, but shepherds who bring the breadth of Catholic social teaching into the civic discourse in a way that transcends partisanships.
Vatican II is the way forward. I'm not surprised he said that, really. He actually says a lot more, so we'll go to the pillar for a little bit more. But he was essentially putting the U.S. bishops on notice that they need to do more in the civic realm. And it really does begin to show you, where they believe the gospel is. So the pillar published this under the headline, Nuncio to U.S. Bishops, Vatican II offers a roadmap to the church's future. It does. It's a desolate future with few priests and few laity. Not enough priests to give the sacraments. That's where this roadmap leads. And they are compelled to continue going down it because true Vatican II, in their mind, has just not been tried. So we must Vatican II harder. It's been a disaster for the church. It truly has. He said, even if some are inclined to pursue a path that diverges from the pastoral vision of Francis, we know that the way forward is one that does not diverge, but advances on the path of Francis is the way of moving forward in the church, said Cardinal Christophe Pierre, speaking to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops at its fall plenary assembly in Baltimore. So just as an aside, it's very clear that what they're doing, and yes, Pope Leo is in on this, they're turning him into essentially the modernist answer to Pope St. Pius X. They are commanding us to follow the path of synodality. That's almost like the counter to the oath against modernism. And his documents related to it are almost like the modernist version of Pascendi Dominici Gregis, Pius X's landmark encyclical against the errors of the modernists. This, he says, is the way forward. Pope Leo constantly invokes his name and has assured us many, many times that we are going to continue on the path started by Francis. A lot of people don't believe him, even though it's clear he's doing that. And Christophe Pierre turns 80 at the end of January, so he's going to likely be asked to, he's going to submit his resignation as he's required to. He'll likely be asked to retire, but who knows? We might get a new papal nuncio, but it could very well be that Christophe Pierre will stick around for at least a little while. But he continued saying he urged the bishops to continue discerning the future of the church by reflecting on the past, particularly through the lens of the Second Vatican Council. When asked about a Third Vatican Council, Pope Francis said the time is not right because we are still working to fully implement the Second Vatican Council, he said. His pontificate was marked not by innovation for its own sake, but that might fully reflect the vision of the council. In this new apostolic letter on education, Pope Leo asked the same question when he urges educational communities to raise their eyes and know how to ask ourselves where we are going and why. This is in reference to him opening with the question to the bishops, where has the church in America been going and where is it going? This act of examining the direction of our journey is an essential part of Christian discernment. It's something that every bishop must do when thinking about the church entrusted to his care. He urged the bishops to look towards Vatican II as a map to guide and direct the future of the church. The documents of the Second Vatican Council gifted the church with a map for the journey ahead. Yet the territory that this map outlined was in many ways uncharted. The vision of the church was a vision for the future, the prophetic orientation to a world that was only beginning to take shape. He goes on to say Francis called the church to speak with a single evangelical voice, prophetic, merciful, and uniting in service to the poor. He suggested there will be continuity between Francis and Leo, adding that Leo's early writings build off Francis's legacy in Vatican II. And he goes on to say that the council and the popes urge us and command us to address the world's problems. I mean, the path the church has been on since the 60s has been one of rapid decline. It just has been. Fewer Catholics go to Mass regularly than ever before. Fewer Catholics receive the sacraments. Fewer Catholics take the sacraments all that seriously. Fewer of them believe in the real presence. That's the path we've been on. Calling for certain sins to be suddenly accepted by the church in the name of mercy and accompaniment. But a good example of what this looks like when the rubber hits the road of activism and the rest, we go back to Info Vaticana, where they give us this headline. Parallel before COP30, the fundamental contribution of the Holy See and the local churches must be to raise the level of awareness. If you don't know what COP30 is, it's an environmental conference going on in Brazil. It's all about the thermometer problem, that problem with carbon and, hotter summers and all the rest of that. The church, through not just Pope Leo and not just Pope Francis, but Benedict XVI at least, and John Paul II in his latter years, fully aligned the church with this issue in the secular realm. They trusted the expertise of the secular experts and aligned themselves fully with it. And that's what he's talking about. So when he's talking about this, when he says the fundamental contribution of the Holy See and the local churches, that's your U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, it's your Brazilian Bishops Conference, that's the church in Oklahoma City, that's the church in Dallas, Texas, that's the church in Dubuque, Iowa, wherever you are, the fundamental contribution must be to raise the level of awareness on that environmental issue. Not the fundamental contribution of the Holy See being the witness to the gospel of Jesus Christ and the teaching of the faith and bringing souls to Christ and the joys of having the door to salvation open to you if you merely acknowledge Christ for who he is and then pick up your cross and follow him and do what he told you to do. No, not that. It's to raise the level of awareness on the green stuff. Congratulations, Cardinal Parolin. From the article, quote, Parolin acknowledged that the phenomenon of the thermometer issue, quote, involves a growing number of people, especially the most vulnerable. Recalled recent events with authorities from the Pacific Islands, threatened, he said, by disappearance due to rising sea levels. Cardinal emphasized that the Church, from the Holy See, has committed itself to this cause, citing Pope Francis's encyclicals Laudato Si and Laudate Deum, and affirmed that local churches have also aligned themselves with this approach. In his view, the Church's role is not to offer technical solutions, but to raise awareness and provide an ethical response to the crisis. And he goes on and says what he said at the beginning. Nothing new under the sun. The insistence on ecological discourse and multilateralism has become commonplace in Vatican circles, but no less worrying for that. Is this still an evangelizing effort, or rather a complacent dialogue with worldwide structures that promote an anthropocentric and secularized view of creation? This is the authors of the piece asking this question. The Cardinal even quoted St. Paul, "The time is short," an expression that in the Apostles' mouth alluded to the urgency of conversion, not to the implementation of the Paris Agreement. But this blurring of the lines between the spiritual and the environmental has become almost the norm. Today, faith seems to be measured by carbon that's been put out to the atmosphere. He argued that this conference should focus less on new rhetoric and more on fulfilling existing commitments, reducing how much carbon we use, providing aid to the most vulnerable countries, and building resilience to natural disasters. What's needed isn't grand pronouncements, but determination and action. Now, I'm going to ask you, how is that speech any different than something you might hear at the Labor Party, from the Labor Party, or from the Democrats in the United States, or from the Greens in Germany, or from any secular left-wing politician? How is any of that any different than what they say? How is that the gospel? Cardinal Parolin's first job as a cardinal is to spread the gospel, to assist the Pope in spreading the gospel. That is his actual literal first job. But they don't believe in it. They don't. None of them do. You see it through these things. They've co-opted the gospel for political purposes. And it's an amazing error that they're making. I'm curious what you think about this. Are you that surprised? When you put what the papal nuncio said together with what Cardinal Parolin said, and even what things I've covered earlier, things going on in Italy with the James Martin stuff, things going on in other countries where all the bishops, for whatever reason, just love that sin and reject what the church taught beforehand on it. When you see all that in action, and then they have the audacity to invoke the gospel by aligning the church with a materialist, false gospel, is any of that surprising? They insist it comes from Vatican II. Maybe we should believe them. Let me know what you think of this in the comments, please. You like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. Sharing this on social media helps a lot too. If you want to support the work we do here at Return to Tradition, options in the description box below. Patreon, Subscribe Star, all that stuff. The Subscribe Plus button is the old join button. Helps keep the daily messages coming. Get access to a Patreon Discord server. The occasional extra thing I give only to supporters of the channel, and is greatly appreciated. But whatever you do, pray for Cardinal Parolin, for Pope Leo, and all the rest of them. They desperately need your prayers. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.